Now, the Paraschuck Caddis. It's one of 3 or 4 of the best dry flies I've ever used. It has the same advantages as any snowshoe wing fly material, the translucence, the buoyancy. It also has a little bit more. I love the particular Arex hook here because it has a little bend to it. So it really captures the nymph trying to turn into the adult and struggling at the meniscus. Fish here, particularly in the flat water, like you can see in these photos, they love bugs that are stuck battling the meniscus. Our fish, they like the fish that they like emergers. They like emerging flies, cripples. They really suck them down much more than active guns that are twitching on the surface, getting ready to fly away. The one thing that's very surprising to me about this fly is it skitters very, very well. And if it's drowned, it'll also work as an emerger like the previous fly. Here's the pattern. And you can tell anything that you're tying with snowshoe rabbit, it just looks buggy. And buggy looking materials or flies have a translucence to them that attract fish because they look like, you know, when a nymph is fighting its way through out of their shuck and through the meniscus, there's light that radiates and highlights the peripheral of that particular insect. And you get that effect between the winging material and a loosely dubbed body. Okay. All right, video time.
Okay, Paraschuck Caddis. What do we have going on here? What are we trying to accomplish in this fly? Well, first, it's the Paraschuck Caddis because we have a little shuck sticking out the back here. Between this shuck and the fact that we form a body with a dubbing loop, and we pick it out, it gives the impression of an exoskeleton hanging on to the bug as the bug is trying to escape through the surface. Now, the snowshoe wing really helps that effect because the snowshoe wing will float and the body will hang just under the meniscus, all right? And that puts it where we fish are very discriminating as to where in the water column fish are going, where the bugs are, where fish feed in the water column. To me, this is the single most important thing about fly selection. If you don't, even if you have the right pattern, if it's not where the fish want to feed, you will not catch that many fish on it. But if you have a close pattern, not the perfect pattern, but a reasonably close pattern, and you're fishing it where they're looking to feed, you will do okay. Now, the best of all worlds is to have a very imitative type of pattern in the exact area of the water column where the fish like to feed. Here on spring creeks and on the Delaware, they like to feed in the film. So what we're looking for here is the translucence, the little shine around the body, which you will get. The snowshoe is translucent. Light will go through the snowshoe. It will be picked up and augmented by the fuzzy body, by the shuck hanging out the back. Now, the thorax, I don't want to be fuzzy. The thorax, I want to be opaque. I don't want light penetrating the thorax. And then, of course, you have the hackle. That will also keep it in the right area of the water film. So I think that's why it's a really effective fly. It's much more effective than just about any caddis pattern I've ever used. The only caddis pattern I've ever used that's a complete dry fly that works as well as this, and maybe better, they're in the realm together, is an Irish caddis. The two of those patterns are super, super, super deadly. And I should have mentioned before, if I did not, I'll mention it now. Every one of these flies that I'm tying that has the snowshoe, you can easily substitute other materials for snowshoe. You can substitute some kind of polyfibers. I know that Gary Borger flies like to do that. You can substitute some kind of deer hair for it, but I think snowshoe has the ability, you put gink on it once at the start of the day. If I have to put it on a second time, it's very, very rare. It'll float all day long. The other thing is it's got this translucence to it that most materials don't have. Durable, translucent, ties beautifully, compresses better than poly. All right, so your fly gets to maintain that thin look that I think is really, really successful. Okay. All right. So now let's get started on a Paraschuck Caddis. This is the article that we did in the magazine. So I like this hook. This is an Arex 521. What I like about it for this is that I can put a little bit of a dip in the back of the body here, just that little bit of a bend. Now, I'm going to end up tying this fly with 2 different threads. I'm going to finish the fly. They're both Semper Fly nano threads. I'm going to finish it with this rusty color because I like the head to stand out a little bit, but I'm going to form the body with the white color. And the reason that I form the body with the white color is something I get from my salmon tying. If you tie flies for salmon and you use a darker thread underneath, say the butt or the tag or any of those things, that color will bleed through and affect the look of the floss. I don't want that to happen. Well, I want to control it with any fly that I'm tying with dubbing. So in this particular case, I want it to stay tan. And if I use a darker color underneath, it'll add some darkness to the tan. I don't want that to happen. Sometimes I'll put like a little pink in there, a little pink thread, or maybe if I'm making an attractor pattern, I might put a little fire orange thread in there, or maybe I'll put a little pale olive thread in there. But this one I want to stay tan. So I'm using white so that I don't affect the color at all. This is straight Z-line. Okay. Again, if you're going to make a mistake, make a mistake on the side of sparseness. Less is more, I believe, generally speaking, with fly tying. It not only saves you a few dollars on materials or pounds, being that this is Britain, but it will also, I think, catch more fish. Okay, so we want to keep it directly on top of the hook shank, okay? One of the things I love about a really nice vise is that you can just rest your hand in this bend right here. This is a J vise. Very, very, very good vise. The hook did not slip. I put it in wrong. I'll straighten it out in a minute. Okay. All right, so we've got the underbody formed. I don't want this to be quite as long as the body. That should be good right about there. Let me straighten this hook out a little bit. All right. So I've got the shuck formed. That's a pretty easy step. The next thing that I have is a rib. To me, caddis are very segmented, and I think the rib accentuates that segmentation. So I put a rib in. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. I've caught plenty of fish on this fly that don't have a rib, but I personally like the look of the rib. And let's face it, part of our fly tying is about satisfying our artistic side as well as catching fish. All right, so there's my rib. And you'll notice also that I tied this rib in underneath the hook shank. All right, I didn't tie it in on top. I didn't tie it in on either side. Again, that's a totally anal thing to do to keep it ultra, ultra, ultra neat and balanced on both sides. Do the fish care? I seriously doubt it. Okay. All right. Now, I have to get my dubbing out. I mix my dubbings, and I like to blend. Cucci and Nastasi wrote a book called Spectrumized Dubbing Blend, or Spectrumized Color Theory, or something like that. And they talked about how very few insects in nature are truly one solid color. They're usually a blend or a modeling of colors, and that's a very true statement. So I like to have a little bit of a mix when it comes to my dubbings. So I always mix Antron in with it, and I mix a little bit of mostly tan, a little touch of yellowy or orange color, a little touch of a darker brown in there, a tiny touch of pink, whatever I can put in there to just accent and make things stand out a little bit. Now, this technique I'm using now, it's called touch dubbing, okay? I have the wax on the thread, and I want this to be so light that light just light in terms of density, and then light in terms of, you know, the stuff that we use to see. I want it to bleed through. And you can see how little dubbing I put on there, okay? That's really important. That's called a touch dub technique. It was made pretty popular by Gary LaFontaine. And then I'm going to loop it. I take my dubbing loop tool. Oh, look at that. I got to tighten up my vise here. Hang on a second. Just so a professional shows you how to handle an emergency situation. Apparently, I didn't have my jaws tight enough. It's still not right. There we go. Well, almost. There we go. That's good. Okay. So now I spin the spinner. And you can see how I get this spiky sort of loop out of the deal. And what I like to do is I like to wind back and forward so I don't get any holidays. I took my third hand off of this particular vise today, so I knew it would never get in your way. So I'm just going to do this by hand. And I hope you can see how the dubbing is starting to form this very translucent effect. I think that very much helps whenever you are trying to imitate an insect trapped in the film. The meniscus itself, the film of the water, it's very, very powerful. It's like hitting a rubber wall for the fish and for the bugs, and they have a very difficult time getting through it. In fact, most of the time, they have to have several attempts to pass through the meniscus and become airborne. So while they're transitioning through there, they're not fully formed adults yet, for the most part. Some insects are, but most of them aren't. Most of them are in the process of leaving the shock. And what I want to do is give that impression of life. Okay, so I take a couple of extra turns past where the body is. I do that so that the body won't slip on me while I'm tying. I also like to loop this back around, and it really locks it in place. Okay. All right, so what you can see here, I don't know if it's in perfect focus. I highly doubt it. I'm shooting this with a macro lens, so the depth of field is limited. What I'm doing now is just hitting top, bottom, left, right with a little bit of Velcro. And you can see how I've created this really buggy effect, like traditionally we do with nymphs. When you put a rib on, the classic technique is to counterwind however you put the body on. I really, truly don't think it makes a difference very often, but we'll go with that. I also like to keep my bodkin available. And if I'm going to trap down any fibers, I pick them out as I go. You can see how that rib stands out, gives it a little bit of segmentation and a little bit of flash. Okay, I'm a big believer in less is more. The Delaware is generally known as one of the toughest fisheries for trout in the United States, and all wild fish. So if you can consistently get them to do well, you're in great shape. I left my wire cutters over on my fly tying bench. So I'm going to use my scissors. And if you ever do that, always go deep into the scissors so you don't dull the tips. All right. You'll notice also that I took an extra turn of the wire at the end so that it doesn't slip. That extra turn is always a big help. Again. And I hope you can see how buggy that looks with all of the fibers sticking out in various directions. So light is going to breathe through the hair, the antron, which captures air bubbles, and the shock sticking out at the end here. Okay. All right. So I have the rear half of the fly done. Now the next thing I'm going to do is create a parachute post. And when I create this post, I'm going to use, these are EP fibers. I would imagine in Britain that Centaur fly fibers are more readily available. I've never used them in my life, but any kind of Antron, poly kind of material, you're really not going to, this has nothing to do with the catching of the fish except to anchor the post. So I take my fibers and what I do is I loop it under the hook shank and I lock it into place. Okay. These first few wraps, the only purpose of these first few wraps is to give this a general place on the shank. I always like to leave a little bit of extension up top because now I'm going to grab that and hold it while I pass my bobbin around. And what I'm doing is tying literally on the post itself, working my way up and then working my way down. And I'm actually going to end up doing this twice. Whoa!
Happens even to the best.
I love the fact that they have weight. I like a bobbin that has a little weight to it, but I do not like that it's easy to make that tension or loose. Okay. Not a big deal if it happens, as you can see, but I don't like that it gets loose. All right, so now you can see I have it pointed up in the air. I take a little bit of crazy glue and I just go right where the thread is on the post.
Chris, are you okay, or do we need to call
And then I
911?
do the same exact thing.
He's okay. He's having palpitations, but it's all right.
This is a pretty sparse post. I think maybe in a perfect fly, I would have put a little bit more fibers in there. That's all right. We'll work with this. It's not a problem. Okay. All I do when I pass the bobbin over, you can see here, I pass, and I hook the thread with my ring finger and I pull it around. Okay, now I'll shorten it some. Okay. By the way, I'm very cheap on my materials. I would then take this, split it in half and get 2 more posts out of the deal. Okay. All right. Now, next thing I got to do is put the hackle, attach it to the post. This is a Cree hackle. Oh, do I love Cree hackles. I think I'll be buried with my Cree hackles. I don't think I'm willing them to anyone. It seems that this is a little bit long. So let me pick another one. Here's Cree color, right? Hebert minor necks from Whiting. I think Whiting make the most incredible hackle that you can ever imagine on the face of the earth. So the Hebert minor is one of their strains. And they have some colors in there that the regular Whitings do not. So I just picked one with a little bit shorter fibers here. Yeah, that's okay. It's a hair longer than I would have liked, but I'll get over it. Now, when I tie in this fiber, I really like to lock it in. There's nothing worse than having your fly come apart when you're trying to catch fish. So when I tie this is the way I do it. Parachutes are a funny thing. For years, here back in the States, there's a gentleman by the name of Del Maza, and he is considered the godfather or the guru of parachute patterns. And for years, I thought I was doing it the right way, his way. And then I found out I'm not. I'm doing it completely wrong, according to him. But it's always worked for me. So this is the way I do it. And I have it so down pat that this is my technique. I'm not claiming originality for it, just rather the way I do it. I'm sure plenty of people did it before me. And I'm going to show you how I do it. You do it the way you want to do it. First, I always turn the shiny part of the hackle to the stem. And then I take 2 turns and tie it in.
Should have said to the post.
Now I will work my way up the stem, but I want to be sure to keep the shiny side against the stem. And I want to leave about 1/8 of an inch of the stem where the barbules are stripped off, but there's still a threaded area on that stem to tie off on, because I'm going to tie my whip finish off on the stem. Okay. Now you'll notice something here. I have my hackle. I have about 1/8 of an inch here with no hackle on it. That's really important. So when I start turning it, they don't splay in all directions. But then as you come down, you'll notice that the stem turns underneath right here. And I like to track that stem just like that. And what that does is now I have it locked in 2 planes, both vertical and horizontal. And the chance of that feather ever slipping is virtually nil. From my calculus training, as the limit of force approaches maximum, you will not see that feather slip at all. Sorry, I just needed to get something to drink there. Okay, so we'll leave that feather alone and come back to it later. The next thing I'm going to do is tie in my snowshoe wing. Now, I want you to notice I've done something very, very subtle here. If you notice, there is very little distance or difference in the height here to the height of the body. It's practically the same. And for my style of tying, I don't like a caddis wing to stick up at an angle like this. I like my caddis wings to sit flush so that it's in the film and this hangs below the film. It's a personal element of style. It doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. It's my way of doing it. If you want your wing to kick up at an angle like this, then you want to create this lower and you want to have a bump right here. So you'd want a thicker body. And then when the snowshoe hits here, it go boink, and it would follow parallel to the feather, okay? But by making them even, it will sit right along the shank. And I am very into tying herring salmon flies. And my patterns, the way I like to do them, the wing always sits along the body. I don't like the wing to sit up. So I cut off a clump of snowshoe. Normally I'd make it a clump like 4 times this thick because I'd be tying a bunch of these flies, but I'm only tying one. Okay. And remember, we're going to trim this off. So I cut these flush. Remember, these are beautiful because they compress so well. Jam them right against the post. When you pull, do not use centrifugal force. Can you see how that's pulling the wing over? If you have a problem with your wings where they don't always sit directly on the back, it's because you're using torque. Torque is circular force. We don't want that. What we want to make sure we do is that we pull straight down. So I loop it loosely, pull straight down, loose, straight down, straight down, straight down, straight down. This nano thread takes so much pressure. Okay. And then I just look at the wing sitting there, and I usually go about halfway down the shuck. There we go. There's my wing. I'm sure to include some of that underfur because it really helps it flow. All right, now I'm going to switch threads. I like the thorax to be a touch darker here, and I want the thread to bleed through a little bit. Again, personal matter of taste and particular bug too, because it's not this way with all bugs. But with our particular tan caddis, it's the larva is, and the pupa is a little more yellowy, and the adult just has a little bit darker tan. So I'll allow for this to bleed through. And remember, you are not going to you're not going to form a dubbing loop with this. Now you want it to be opaque. So same tan dubbing, but this time it's going to be a little darker because of the thread underneath.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I did touch the butt. Now I'm going to smash the dubbing down. In case you didn't notice, I just put a tiny little bit of saliva on my fingers. And I like to fill in the gap in the front first because it's not as tall as the back. I can see already I'm going to need a little bit more dubbing. That's because I haven't tied one of these in a while. So my sense of proportion's a bit off. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how this has come out, considering it's probably been, I don't know, since I wrote the article that I found this out. Okay, there we go. I love the fact that I can look underneath and see how the bottom of the dry fly looks. That's very important, considering that's what the trout sees. All right, and now I take a couple of turns along the base. So I have my wing, I have my body, I have my thorax. In all honesty, I think this story is a little tiny touch longer than I would normally like it, but I think you get the idea. And now I'm going to start wrapping the hackle. I usually like 3 to 5 turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I wrap underneath. This is the trickiest part here. I wrap underneath the hackle and I almost try to pick it up, all the fibers, so I don't mash any of them down. And then I do a second turn, same exact thing. So I do 2 turns through. Now I come through for the third turn. And the third turn, I will pull up and put it right along the post. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pull tight. Trim off the hackle. Trim off the excess post. Fish won't see it up there, so don't be afraid to leave a little bit of extra so you don't accidentally cut the thread. I did trap a couple of fibers down here. I will cut them and get rid of them. I had a pair of scissors, a pair of angles given to me by the owner of the company. And after many years of using them, I'm talking like 15 years, the tips got a little bit dull. So I gave them back to him to sharpen for me, and I've never gotten them back again. So now I use these other scissors, different companies, and they're not as good. They're pretty good, but they're not as good. Okay, so there is my Paraschuck Caddis done, and I just take a little bit of crazy glue and knock it down right there so it sets. That by far is the most difficult pattern that we will tie today. Okay, there's one 8th grader right there, so I'll get rid of him. All right, Paraschuck Caddis, all done.
Good.
Okay.
Right.
Any questions?
So right at the beginning, you said that you'd put away your third arm.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
This is a third arm right here. So normally I would tie with it, but I was very afraid that I would keep knocking it and it would get in the way of the video. So I just took it out and put it on the side. And if there are certain, like if you're going to do a dubbing loop or certain times where you hang if you tie rotary, where you hang your thread over here, and then you start cranking on the wheel here.
Yeah.
Around, and I wasn't able to do that.
Yeah.
So, any other questions? All right, let me go into a little bit of trimming here. Oh, hold it. There we go. A little bit of trimming. So from the side, we can see the trimming creates the shape of a right triangle. From the butt ends, another triangle, isosceles. Now, how many of you guys, when you were in school, said to your teacher, when will I ever use this math stuff, right? So here you are. You're using geometry. There's my right triangle. And if you looked at it from the back, that would be the isosceles triangle that you would see in the back. Okay. So that should guide your trimming. So basically you're making what looks like a caddis wing. All right.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Mhm.
Okay. Point of emphasis of the Paraschuck Caddis. I can't emphasize this enough. One of the reasons I think that the Semper Fly nano thread is so good is it compresses. It holds very strong. That's great, but it makes nice tiny heads. And snowshoe compresses much better than deer hair, and that allows you to form nice thin tapered bodies. Next, the fly will float. It floats flush in the film rather than on top of the film. Snowshoe just has phenomenal light diffusion through the wing, and I really think that has something to do with why it's so effective. The body bends as if fighting the meniscus when you use that 521 hook, and it fishes very well as an emerger on the swing, just like the last one. Now, the usual, if you make the body fat, the usual would work well in pocket water like this. This is the Ausable on the left and the Rapid on the right. Normally, if you're going to fish the kind of patterns that I fish on the Delaware, if you're going to fish it in water like this, they really don't work that well. You want beefier, chunkier flies. It's also, I don't tend to see too much water like that from what I understand in England. But if you do fish it, the Paraschuck is one of the flies that will fish very well in this water. The other one's not so much, but the Paraschuck will. Okay. Any questions?
Mark, the rivers that you fish in Wales, are they more like the Ausable here? Do they have
Very
this
much
sort
so,
of-
yeah. If you go
Yeah.
up onto the Wye and places like that, even the Mono and things like that, fairly similar to the one on the left. Some similar to the ones on the right. When they've got some water, which isn't that often at the moment.
I'll tell you what, if you look up rather than the unusual, if you look up the usual, which is the same exact fly, except you make the body out of snowshoe rabbit dubbing also, right from the foot. You just cut it up fine. And you use that fly in there, make it fat.
Yeah, as Bob said, I would use something pretty chunky, especially in that white water.
Right.
They just won't see it otherwise. So.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With the snowshoe in that water, it'll float like a cork. So if you get that and you just use like everything that you would when you trim out the fly, and you take the trimmings and you make your body out of it, just twist it on. And Chris, if you can do that without wax, God bless you. I can't. Just wrap it on there. Use fire orange thread. Let it bleed through. It's a big time attractor fly.
Yeah.
If you look up the fly called the usual and you see its history, it is deadly on water like that. That's exactly where it was originated. Okay.
I think we